My girlfriend laughed when her rich friends called me replaceable, so I pretended nothing happened, gathered proof they were stealing from their own clients, sent everything to federal investigators before their luxury wedding weekend, and watched her bridesmaids turn against her during the reception while cameras recorded every humiliating second. You're sweet, Lawson, but let's be honest. Guys like you are replaceable. Blair said it the way people say things they've been thinking for a long time. Casually, almost kindly, like she was doing me a favor by putting it into words. Across the table, Vienna laughed quietly. Not loud, just enough. The kind of laugh that says I agree, but I'm too polished to say it myself. Wine glasses clinked. Someone changed the subject. And I sat there, in a $400 restaurant in Seattle's East Side, surrounded by people who collectively managed more investor capital than most small countries, and I watched my girlfriend, Hensley, do absolutely nothing. No correction, no defense, just a slow sip of her burgundy and a half smile pointed somewhere toward the window. That was the moment I realized I wasn't sitting at her table anymore. I was just being tolerated there. 3 months later, I watched those same people hide their phones as federal agents walked into the lobby of a luxury Charleston resort hotel. It was the Friday of Blair's wedding weekend. The florals cost $40,000. Nobody was smiling by Saturday night. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'd been with Hensley for 4 years. We met in Seattle, back when she was still working at a mid-sized PR firm, and I was 3 years into my compliance analyst role at a regional investment advisory. We were both 27. Neither of us had money that meant anything yet. We ate Thai food on her couch and argued about streaming shows, and it was easy in the way early relationships are easy, before people start comparing their lives to other people's. Then her social circle changed. It didn't happen all at once. It rarely does. First came Blair, who Hensley met at a conference. Then Romy through Blair. Then Adler, who was Blair's fiancé, and his whole crew of Seattle tech money guys who wore the right watches and talked about their portfolio synergies at dinner. Within 18 months, our Thursday night Thai food had become Saturday rooftop parties in South Lake Union. Glass towers, cold lighting, people who check their follower counts the way other people check the weather. Hensley lit up in those rooms. I didn't. You just don't understand ambitious people, she told me once, after I said something that apparently revealed how unambitious I was. I don't even remember what I said. Something about preferring a quieter weekend. You think too small, she said another time. I didn't argue. I never argued about those things. I just watched. That's mostly what I do. Watch. The dinner parties started happening monthly, then bi-weekly. Always the same core group. Adler and Blair. Romy and whoever Romy was seeing that month. Vienna, who had no apparent occupation but limitless financial confidence. Briggs, who ran a private equity firm out of a Bellevue office park and had the handshake grip of someone who had been rehearsing power since adolescence. Hensley would spend the afternoon getting ready. Not in the way she used to, quick and laughing and asking if her earrings matched. Now it was deliberate, strategic, like she was preparing for a performance. I'd put on a clean shirt, and she'd look at me, and something would flicker across her face that she never said out loud. At the table, I'd listen mostly. That's what I do. People who talk a lot don't notice who's paying attention. The comments came in layers. Briggs once explained crypto market cycles to me like I'd never heard of a financial instrument before. I let him. Vienna made a joke once about how some people are built for stability and some people are built for growth, and looked at me when she said the first part. I smiled, asked her which funds she was currently in. She didn't answer directly. Nobody with real money talks about their specific positions. I know that. I wasn't sure she did. But the comment that lodged itself deepest was the one from Blair. Guys like you are replaceable. Not because it was cruel, exactly. Because Hensley didn't move a muscle. I didn't realize it then. But she'd already started building a life that didn't include me. The emotional withdrawal happened so gradually that I kept second-guessing my own perception. That's the design of it, I think. You spend so long wondering if you're imagining things that by the time you're certain, you've already lost half the evidence. She started keeping her phone face down. Not always. Just more than before. She started coming home later from lunches that had no clear agenda. Just Romy, she'd say. Or the girls. Something vague. She started getting gifts. Not from me. A bracelet I didn't recognize. A weekend bag, Italian leather, that appeared in the closet without any conversation. A hotel key card I found in her jacket pocket and held for a moment before putting it back exactly where it was. I didn't say anything. I just started paying attention differently. There's a thing that happens when you work in financial compliance for a decade. You develop a particular kind of patience. You learn that the information you need is almost never in the document you're looking at. It's in the document behind that document. The discrepancy in the footnotes. The vendor name that appears twice under two different billing addresses. You learn to build timelines before you build conclusions. So that's what I did. I started building a timeline. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I'm Lawson, 31, Seattle-based, though I grew up in Tampa. I've been a compliance analyst, technically a senior compliance analyst now, though the title means less than the access it grants, for a firm that provides advisory services to a range of investment clients. Pension funds, family offices, a few smaller hedge structures. My job, stripped to its core, is to find problems before regulators do. I'm good at it. I don't look like someone who's good at it. I know that. I'm quiet in a way that reads as forgettable. I wear clothes that fit but don't announce themselves. I don't talk about my work at dinner parties because it's genuinely difficult to explain in a way that makes it sound interesting. I review fund documentation for structural irregularities, kills conversations. Which is fine. I've never needed to be interesting to the right people. Just accurate. It started with something small. Adler, Blair's fiancé, ran an investment management firm called Meridian Capital Advisors. I'd heard him talk about it at dinners. Impressive client list. Institutional money. A few high-net-worth families. He had the kind of casual confidence about it that either means you're genuinely successful or you've gotten very good at performing success. I'd never looked him up professionally. No reason to. Until Hensley mentioned, in passing, that she'd been helping Blair organize some paperwork for the wedding. Administrative stuff. Invoices, vendor contracts. She said it like it was nothing. I nodded. But something about the phrasing stayed with me. Hensley worked in PR. She was good at it. Relationships, messaging, client management. She had no background in finance. No reason to be handling invoices for anything beyond her own clients. I didn't ask about it. I started looking at other things instead. Adler's firm had a public-facing website and a regulatory filing history I could access through standard compliance databases. Nothing unusual there at first glance. Clean audits on the surface. No visible enforcement actions. But the fund structure was unusual. Layered in a way that wasn't quite efficient enough to be accidental and wasn't quite aggressive enough to immediately trigger review. The kind of architecture you build when you want optionality later. There were 3 offshore entities listed as strategic partners in a 2022 disclosure. 2 were in the Cayman Islands. 1 was a consulting LLC registered in Delaware with a single-line description, advisory services. I'd seen that phrase before. It means different things in different contexts. In the context I know best, it's sometimes what you call a payment vehicle. I want to be precise here, because the story I'm telling could easily become something it isn't. I wasn't on a mission. I wasn't building a case. I was a man in a relationship that was quietly falling apart, noticing things because noticing things is what I do by nature. But once I started looking, I couldn't stop. I ran Adler's Delaware LLC against public vendor databases and found that the same entity name appeared as a listed contractor for 2 of Meridian's client funds, a pension advisory account and a family office structure. Total invoiced amount across 18 months, $2.3 million. No deliverable specified. No project completion documentation. Just advisory services rendered. That's not how legitimate consulting arrangements work. Not at that scale. Not for institutional clients who have their own documentation requirements. That's how you move money. I started a spreadsheet. Encrypted. Backed up offline. I labeled the first tab, Timeline. She came home one night in late November, and she was different in a way I couldn't precisely name. Lighter. Something unwound in her posture. She'd been to dinner with Blair. Just Blair. She kissed my cheek when she came in and sat on the edge of the couch and scrolled her phone for 20 minutes without saying much, and I watched her from the kitchen while I washed dishes. She looked like someone who had just been given something. Not a gift. Something more like permission. I dried my hands and sat next to her. Good dinner, I said. Yeah, really good, actually. Blair seemed happy. With the wedding stuff? She's thriving. She smiled at her phone. Everything's coming together. That's good. A pause. I found a bracelet in the dish by the door, I said. I didn't recognize it. Did you leave it there? She didn't look up. Oh yeah? Blair gave it to me. Early thank you gift. For all the help. That's generous. She's generous. Another smile. She's a generous person. I nodded and went to bed. I lay in the dark and listened to her move through the apartment, and I felt something close quietly in me. Not anger, not jealousy, just clarity. The bracelet was Cartier. I looked it up. The model she was wearing retailed for just under $4,000. Blair was giving $4,000 thank you gifts for help with vendor invoices. I opened my spreadsheet, started a second tab. I spent 3 weekends in December building out the picture. I wasn't hacking anything. I want that to be clear. Everything I accessed was either public record regulatory filing, commercially available financial database, or documentation that crossed my professional desk through legitimate channels. Meridian was a referral relationship with 2 of our firm's clients, which meant I had indirect access to certain aggregated reports. The more I looked, the more organized the architecture became. Meridian's offshore partners weren't passive. They were receiving quarterly payments from multiple client accounts. The payments were categorized as performance consulting fees, which, under the fund's client agreements, were discretionary at Adler's authorization. In other words, he could approve them himself, without client sign-off. The clients didn't know. The amounts were sized to stay below automatic audit triggers. Not quite structured, technically, but intentional. Someone with compliance knowledge had helped design the thresholds. I looked at the Delaware LLC again. Looked at its registered agent. The registered agent was a law firm. The law firm had one other public association I could find, a charitable foundation filing from 2021, listing a donor as Romy Chaston. Romy, from the dinner parties. I sat with that for a while. This wasn't just Adler. This was the group. The charity was called the Cascadia Arts Fund. It had filed 3 years of tax returns showing significant donations received and disbursed. But the disbursement recipients were thin. Minimal documentation. 2 of the listed grant recipients appeared to share a mailing address with one of Meridian's offshore entities. Round-trip money. Charitable deduction in. Operational use out. Classic. I opened a third tab. Entities. I started mapping the connections. Meridian to the LLC to the offshore accounts, the offshore accounts to the charity back to Meridian's operating structure through a sponsorship arrangement listed in a footnote. It was elegant, actually, in a cold, technical way. Whoever designed it knew what they were doing. Then I found Hensley's name. It was in an internal email chain that had been produced as part of a routine compliance information exchange. One of those document pulls that happens between advisory firms when shared clients are involved. My firm's general counsel had flagged it for my review months earlier because of a billing discrepancy. I hadn't looked closely at the time. I looked now. In the chain, someone from Meridian's operations team was discussing vendor invoice formatting. The instructions on how to structure certain payments to ensure they pass through client billing systems without triggering review flags. Copied on the email, H. Caldwell. Hensley's professional email. I closed my laptop, sat in the kitchen, didn't eat the dinner I'd been making. The affair wasn't even the worst part. January, February. Hensley and I continued. Dinners together sometimes. A weekend trip to Portland that felt like 2 strangers sharing an Airbnb. She was trying, I think, in the way people try when they sense something shifting but can't name it. She asked me once if I trusted her. Of course I do, I said. I meant it as a statement of fact, not the fact she thought I was stating. I organized everything into a package. 12 documents. 3 spreadsheets. A 14-page narrative I wrote myself, walking through the financial connections in plain language that a federal investigator with General Security's fraud background could follow without needing to be an expert in fund structure. I cross-referenced everything twice. I had the offshore transfer records, the false charity filings, the invoice formatting instructions, the shell company registration chain, and the client account statements showing unauthorized fee withdrawals going back to early 2021. Total client harm, estimated conservatively, somewhere between $4.20 and $6.8 million across multiple accounts. Not cartoon money, real money, belonging to real institutional clients. Pension funds, families. I also documented the affair, not out of personal interest at that point, but because the individual Hensley had been involved with, a man named Briggs, which, yes, from the same group, had his own role in the scheme. He was listed as an independent consultant to the Cascadia Arts Fund and had authorized 2 of the larger offshore transfers. It was relevant. Everything was relevant. I had one contact at the SEC's Seattle regional office, a woman I'd worked with on an unrelated matter 3 years earlier. Professional, thorough, the kind of person who reads footnotes. I sent her the package in early March. No cover letter, just the documents, organized chronologically, and a single line at the top. I believe the attached reflects ongoing federal securities fraud and tax violations. The evidence is documentary. I am available to speak by phone. She called me 4 days later. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. At the end of it, she said, "Don't move anything. Don't discuss this with anyone. We'll be in touch." "I understand," I said. I didn't move anything. I didn't discuss it with anyone. I went home and made dinner and told Hensley about a compliance seminar I'd attended that week. She looked at her phone while I talked. Blair and Adler had been planning their wedding for almost a year. It was the social event of their particular universe. The venue was a resort property outside Charleston, not because either of them was from the South, but because that was the aesthetic they wanted. Old money air, Spanish moss, private ballrooms. The guest list was 140 people, mostly from their Seattle circle, flown in for a 3-day weekend. Hensley was a bridesmaid. I was invited as her guest. I booked my flight, confirmed my hotel room within the resort block, and said nothing unusual to anyone. In the weeks before, federal investigators had been quietly building their own parallel documentation. They'd issued informal information requests to 2 of Meridian's institutional clients. They'd identified the offshore account structures independently. My package had given them a roadmap, but they were working their own road. The timing of the wedding weekend was not my choice. It was theirs. We flew into Charleston on a Thursday afternoon. Hensley was in full performance mode, checked bags, coordinated outfit for the airport, engagement with every bridesmaid group chat notification. The resort was exactly what you'd expect. Manicured grounds, staff in matching linen, a welcome cocktail station in the lobby, women in sundresses taking photos of the flower arrangements. I checked in and put my bag in the room and stood at the window and looked at the courtyard below, where Blair was greeting arriving guests with the particular radiance of someone who had been waiting their entire life for a specific Saturday. My phone buzzed. A message from my SEC contact. 2 words. Tomorrow morning. I put my phone in my pocket and went downstairs to join the welcome reception. The rehearsal dinner was on a rooftop overlooking the water. Warm night, strung lights, a jazz quartet in the corner. Everyone was dressed beautifully and photographing everything. I sat at the end of a long table and ate and watched. Adler made a toast that was confident and funny and received warmly. Briggs sat 3 seats away from Hensley. They didn't look at each other more than a few times. But the few times they did, I noted. Romy gave a bridesmaid speech that was emotional and well-constructed and made 3 people cry. Vienna posted continuously. I went to bed early. Said I was tired from traveling. Hensley said she'd be up late with the girls. Of course, I said. Have fun. I woke up at 6 a.m. and went for a walk on the resort grounds. At 8:47 a.m., I watched 2 men in dark suits enter the lobby with a resort manager who looked like he was working very hard to appear calm. I kept walking. At the far edge of the garden path, I checked my phone. My contact had sent a second message. Interviews beginning this morning. You may want to find somewhere to be. I found somewhere to be. The resort had a small library room off the main hallway. Leather chairs, good coffee, 3 other guests reading peacefully. I sat there for 90 minutes and read a novel I'd brought for exactly this purpose. Outside, the day was beautiful. By noon, something had shifted in the energy of the resort. I felt it at lunch, at the outdoor terrace where the wedding party was gathering. The voices were the same. The smiles were the same. But there was a new quality to the way people were holding their phones. Checking them, putting them down, checking them again. Adler had been absent for 2 hours. Blair was smiling harder than the situation required. Hensley glanced at me once across the table with an expression I didn't understand. I smiled back and asked her if she wanted the breadbasket. The wedding ceremony was at 4 o'clock. It was genuinely beautiful, the kind of event that earns its reputation. White chairs and rows across a garden terrace, flowers that probably cost more than my monthly rent, a string quartet, 140 people dressed impeccably. Hensley walked down the aisle with the other bridesmaids looking exactly like someone living their best life. I watched from my seat in the 7th row. Adler stood at the altar looking slightly less composed than he'd looked the night before. Blair was radiant. Genuinely, heartbreakingly radiant. In the specific way of someone who doesn't yet know what the evening holds. The reception was in the ballroom. Dinner service, a 12-piece live band, open bar, the kind of floral centerpieces that get their own content. Wedding photographers circled continuously. Three of the bridesmaids were doing real-time social content, stories, TikTok clips, the ballroom entrance video. Guests were drunk and happy and lit perfectly by the golden hour chandeliers. At 8:15 p.m., the phone started. Not all at once. That's the thing about information moving through a social group. It doesn't arrive like a wave. It arrives like a drip. One person checks their phone. Their face changes. They show the person next to them. Then two people have changed faces. Then four. I was watching from my seat near the edge of the room. Hensley was at the head table. Briggs was 3 tables over from me, and I watched him look at his phone and then put it very carefully on the white tablecloth and not pick it up again for a long time. I heard later, from multiple accounts, because this is the kind of night that generates accounts, that someone in Adler's institutional network had forwarded a document summary to a colleague who was also a wedding guest. The document summary related to the SEC information requests that had gone out to Meridian's clients that week. The colleague forwarded it to 2 more people. By 8:30, there were 6 people in the room who knew something they hadn't known when they sat down for dinner. The first visible crack appeared at the head table. I saw Blair lean toward Adler and say something. I couldn't hear it, but his jaw tightened, and he picked up his phone for the first time all evening and looked at it for a long moment. The band was playing something from the 90s. Guests were dancing. He stood up and left the ballroom. Blair held for about 15 minutes. She kept her posture, kept smiling at the room, accepted congratulations from guests who came to the head table, held her champagne flute. Then Romy leaned over and showed her something on her phone. The smile didn't disappear all at once. It just gradually stopped being a smile and became something else. The shape of a smile without the function of one. I don't know exactly how the affair messages surfaced. I've heard 2 versions. One is that Hensley's phone synced to a shared tablet in the hotel suite and Blair's maid of honor, a woman named Sarah who'd flown in from Atlanta, saw the messages while looking for a charger. The other version is that Briggs's phone showed a notification on the head table while he was away and someone read it. Either way, by 9 p.m., Sarah had said something to one of the other bridesmaids, and the bridesmaid had said something to Romy. And Romy, who had given the tearful speech the night before, who had called Blair her person in front of 140 guests, came to find Hensley. I was at the bar when it happened. I had a clear sight line. I watched Romy approach Hensley at the edge of the dance floor. I watched the brief conversation, 40 seconds, maybe. No raised voices. This group doesn't raise voices in public. But Hensley's face went through 3 distinct phases in those 40 seconds. Confusion. Then the particular stillness of someone whose prepared story has just become unusable. Then something that looked, from where I stood, like a woman watching the floor tilt. Romy walked away without looking back. The photographers were still working. The band was still playing. 2 tables over, a couple was slow dancing, completely unaware. From the lobby, I could see, through the open ballroom doors, 2 additional suited individuals speaking with the resort manager. Briggs left the property at 9:22 p.m. I know this because I was near the exit when he walked out. He passed me without seeing me, or without acknowledging me. He was on the phone. His voice was quiet, fast, controlled. The voice of someone making calls they'd hoped never to make. By 9:45, the social media activity from the wedding had gone quiet. Not ceremonially quiet. Abruptly quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when someone says don't post anything in a group chat. Vienna, who had been uploading continuously since Thursday, had gone dark. Hensley found me near the doors. She looked like herself, but smaller. Like someone had adjusted the resolution. I need to talk to you, she said. Okay, I said. Not here. Can we go upstairs? I looked at her for a moment. I think you should probably stay close to the room. Yes, I said. I'd recommend that. She searched my face. Do you know something? She asked. I know a lot of things, I said. That's always been true. She stared at me. Lawson, you should call an attorney before you speak to anyone tonight, I said. Anyone you don't already trust completely. The color left her face slowly, like water draining. What did you do? She said. Quietly. No drama. Just the question. I documented things, I said. The way I always do. A long silence. How long? She asked. Long enough, I said. She nodded. Once. That was the whole conversation. She went upstairs. I went back into the ballroom. Blair was still there, at the head table. Alone now. Adler hadn't come back, and the bridesmaids had redistributed themselves around the room in the specific pattern of people avoiding a situation. The cake was untouched. A 5-tiered white cake with sugar flowers, Positioned on a table of its own in the corner, a photographer's light still trained on it from earlier in the evening. Nobody was going anywhere near it. The band finished a song. Applause from the guests who were still dancing, still present, still in the version of this night that didn't know what the edges of the room knew. Blair was looking at nothing in particular. I have nothing to feel triumphant about when I picture her there. She wasn't my target. She was collateral to her own world. She'd made choices, tolerated things, looked away from things. But the person sitting alone at the head table while her wedding reception quietly dissolved around her, that's just a person. I don't enjoy that part. I just observed it. Romy left at 10:15. Vienna had been gone since 10. 3 other members of the core group cleared out within the same half hour, quietly, with purpose, the way people exit when they're calculating something rather than just leaving. By 10:40 p.m., there were investigators in the hotel corridor outside the suite Adler had booked for the wedding night. I know because I walked past it once. 2 suits. A conversation I couldn't hear through the door. The hallway smelled like white roses. Downstairs, the band was finishing its last set. Remaining guests were circulating with a looseness that suggested they knew something was off, but not the specifics. The vibe had shifted from celebration to the particular uncertainty of people trying to figure out if they're allowed to leave. I got a glass of water from the bar, stood near the open doors, and looked at the garden. The lights were still strong. The flowers were still perfect. A server came by to collect glasses. Young woman, early 20s, professional and bright. Beautiful reception, I said. Yes, sir, she said. And then, with the quiet candor of service staff who have seen everything. It usually is, up until it isn't. I went to my room at 11. Opened my laptop. Checked my professional email. A brief message from my SEC contact. Timestamp 10:58 p.m. Voluntary interview scheduled for Monday morning with 2 subjects. Third has retained counsel. Evidence documentation acknowledged. Thank you for your cooperation. I closed the laptop. Sat in the quiet for a while. The accounts froze within 6 business days. Not all of them at once. The offshore structures took longer. But Meridian's primary operating accounts, Adler's personal investment accounts, and the Cascadia Arts Fund's charitable holdings were all under restriction within a week of the wedding. The SEC matter became an SEC and DOJ matter. That happens when the dollar figures cross certain thresholds and the offshore component adds a wire fraud dimension. I won't detail the specific charges. They're a matter of public record now, for anyone who wants to look. Adler's firm was placed into receivership pending investigation. The firm's website went offline on a Tuesday. Blair left the resort alone on Sunday morning. The couple hadn't cut the cake. Briggs settled for cooperation. I have no feelings about that. Hensley moved out 3 weeks later. There were no screaming matches. No dramatic final conversation. She packed carefully, in stages, and I helped her move a few boxes to the car because that's what you do. We were polite. 2 people who understood that the version of things between them had concluded. She looked at me once, just before leaving for the last time. You knew for a long time, she said. Not accusing, just placing it. Yes, I said. Why didn't you say anything? Because saying something wouldn't have changed what happened, I said. Only documenting it would. She thought about that. Nodded very slightly. Got in her car. Romy deleted her public social media accounts in April. Vienna's influencer presence went quiet. Briggs's LinkedIn profile, which had listed him as a consultant to the Cascadia Arts Fund, was scrubbed to a bare professional page with no endorsements. The Seattle dinner party circuit moved on. It always does. There's always a new table to sit at. The weekend after Hensley left, I ordered Thai food. Sat on my own couch. Watched something on a streaming service I'd been meaning to watch for 2 years. It was quiet. It was just mine. I ate the whole container and didn't explain it to anyone. That was the last night any of them looked untouchable.